Hi, this is Stephen Brower from Mountain Valley Community College. This is for Computer Literacy Summer 2017, and this is meant to be sort of an overview of Access, intro to the lab 17A. Okay, so what is a database? A loose definition of a database is an organized collection of data. It's organized in a way that we want only good data to get into the database, and we want to be able to search the database and find what we're looking for. Businesses will use databases to record transactions that they have, maybe for sales or for other things like that. So they'll keep track of maybe customers, parts, orders, payments, and so the database can organize those kind of things. In 17A, on the left-hand side here, this navigation pane, two of the things we're going to create are some tables. The tables is where the data actually resides. These other things over here get data from the tables. So if, like, one of the tables that we're going to create is the students table. And what we're going to do in terms of the lab is we're going to manually create the fields, manually type in the first 2 or 3 rows of data, and everything else we're going to import from somewhere else just to save us a bit of typing. So this students table is meant to be the collection of students, where each row, also known as a record, would represent a single student. Another table that we're going to enter, actually we're going to create by importing, is the faculty advisors table. So the idea is the students their information is in one table, the faculty advisors, the information is another. There is a relationship between the table, although in 17A we do not create the relationship, but the faculty advisor field that is in the student table refers to a specific faculty advisor here in the faculty advisor table. The idea behind it is that we could have multiple students with the same faculty advisor, and if I just did that right, I did the A223, and I just picked 4 of the places where that occurs, and all that has to be replicated within this table is just that sort of a reference. The A223, that's the Thea Kilbride. And so instead of having to have the name in multiple places, we just have the code. And so it's one of the things that's done when designing a database is we try to reduce redundant information. And in terms of this course, we're not going to get so much into the design of how we design a database. We're just really carrying out a design that someone else has created. So the tables have the data, and the view that I'm in here, this is called the datasheet view. And the thing that Access allows us to do in the datasheet view is we actually can enter in data, and we can change values that are there. What the other items that are over here, the queries, the forms, and reports, well, the queries and the reports are a way of getting data out of the tables, but for like a reporting, well, that's the name, report, for reporting, but it's sort of a peek into the table and looking at the data a particular way. What my words are, Stephen Brower, is that queries are informal and reports are formal. Now, one thing I'm going to show right now is I'm going to deviate from what Chapter 17A does, and I'm going to show you that I have a query here, and this is the top 5 students who owe money query. And so I just go and double click on the query, and it is in descending by amount owed, showing that these are the ones, students that actually owe money. Where this is coming from is the actual underlying students table. So the query is, so what's really saved behind the scenes is sort of the design of the query, when the query is run, it actually gets the data from the underlying table itself. So let me, for giggles and grins, let's pretend that Simpson really owes $7,500. And if I now go and rerun this query, then now we see Homer Simpson is up top at owing $7,500. So the query, the data is not saved in the query. The data is in the table. So the data is not in this query. The data is in the table. What the query is, it's basically like a saved question, and it goes against the underlying table, asks the question, what are the top 5 students that owe money, and it gets that from the students table and presents that on the screen. Another query I just want to show in terms of what Access can do is I have this thing that says students in a city query. And sort of the idea behind it is let's just pretend that there's an issue with Austin, Texas regarding somehow affecting the students here. And we need to sort of quickly contact just the students in Austin, Texas. Well, I have a query here. It's a saved query, students in a city, and it just says city in general. I go and run the query. It asks me for a city name. I'll type Austin, and now it's showing me these are the students, their address and phones, but they're in Austin, Texas. And so in terms of a query, I actually had it prompt the user. If I go run it again and let me use, I don't know, Round Rock. Whoops, Round Rock. So the idea is every time I run this query, I can put in the data, the city, and it's only showing those students. So this is a saved query. So if this is a common question that's asked of the database, in other words, if we regularly have to go in and look for particular towns, we can save this as a query, so we don't have to actually go and write the query from scratch. Now, more in 17B, we'll get into a little bit more of the queries, but just for those that are curious, let me just go into the design mode here. And one of the things that we'll see, I'll just close the property sheet, is now if you notice there's not a checkbox here in the city field. The city's not coming up in terms of the query, so it's not being shown. But what I have here, these brackets around Enter City, the brackets means it's going to prompt the user, and Enter City is the prompt that actually will be presenting to the user. So I'm just giving you a peek of what happens behind the scenes in terms of this query. And the students who owe query, if I go into the design view for it, then one thing we'll see is that I am sorting descending on the amount owed, and then up here under the return, now I did pick 5, which happens to be on the list, but we actually could have we could have had the top 3 students. We also could have said the top 5% of the students. So we actually could, in terms of limiting the results, we actually could have controlled how many results came back in terms of that query. Another thing that I want to show is that sometimes we can use a query as a prototype for a report. So one of the things I did here as a query is, now this at first glance, if we look at this, we just see these are faculty advisors. What we don't know is necessarily, just from looking at the data, what the significance is. When I look at the name of it, it says full professor faculty advisors. If I look at the design view, I'll see here that the criteria is already hard-coded in as professor, so it's not prompting me. It just automatically is running it. Now, I did this as sort of like my prototype. I want to do a report, a nice fancy report. This is not nice and fancy. This is kind of ugly. For some reason, the book has us go in and try to format data sheets. The reality is, no, we're going to format reports. In reality, we're not going to format data sheets in reality. But what I have is I have a report. So here's this full professor faculty advisors report. It actually is getting the data from the query. The query is getting the data from the table. So I created the query first as like the prototype. Then I created the report from that query. And this just looks a lot neater. I mean, it also has the date and time that the report's being run. We can go and change the title a little bit, even show the page, the number of faculty. So the report is one of those things. It's more like a formal presentation of data, whereas a query is like an informal presentation of data. And for any doubting Thomases, if I just switch back to the design view here, and if I bring up the what am I doing? If I bring up the properties at the report level, oops, sorry, then what we'll see here is the source of the record is the actual query. So that this report is pulling its data from the query is pulling its data from the table. So if we actually do add another full professor, faculty advisor, then they would come up on the report that we have here. So I'm going far afield from what the lab is, but I was just trying to show a couple things. One is that the data is being held in the tables. So the two tables that we have, these are the datasheet views, which allows us to see the data at a glance. The queries are informal views of the tables, and so they're questions on the tables. And so we're going to create a query, a simple query in 17A. We're going to create some more robust queries in 17B. Now this is the report that we're going to be creating in 17A. And so we will create a report, we'll format the report, and the idea is that it's a nice looking report, a nicer view of the data. The one other thing we're going to be creating, and we're not really truly using, is that if we were using this Access database for having users to enter data, we really wouldn't have the users enter data through the datasheet view. We would have them use a form. And so one of the things that we are going to create is a form, which is this graphical user interface. It's this GUI view, and in this here, the entire screen is being used for one student record. Now, one thing where I deviated from what's happening in 17A is I changed the faculty advisor to be a drop-down list. So, so when it goes and grins, if I want to go and pick someone else, and I'm sorry, if I want to pick a student and I want to change their faculty advisor, I actually can click on the drop-down list, and then I can just pick a different faculty advisor. Now, if you notice, we do have that little pencil, meaning it's change doesn't get saved. But if I do tab off of this record, then that faculty advisor has now been saved for that record. So what I'm showing you is the power of what we can do in a form, where we can have something like a drop-down list. And so since there is a relationship between the student table and the faculty advisors table, then we can show the drop-down list from that relationship. Now in 17A, we're not going to actually establish that relationship. We are going to do that in 17B. But I did for this demo here show that there's a relationship between, so the faculty advisor ID and the student table is coming from the faculty ID in the faculty advisors table. By having this relationship in, then if I'm actually, even if I'm in the datasheet view, if I'm in the if I'm in the datasheet view, I'm very sorry. If I'm in the datasheet view for the students, and if I go in to one of the faculty advisor fields, now this is not going to work in 16A. I'm sorry, in 17A. What I'm about to do is not going to work in 17A, but we're going to do something like this in 17B. And because I've now done the referential integrity, I cannot leave this record. I cannot leave the Carla record because the faculty advisor ID I'm referring to is invalid. So I think just in terms of a rough overview of Access, of what it can do, it's an organized collection of data. I think that this is at least a good overview for right now.